Welcome back and thanks for staying with Africa News Network First Fast Live. This is BizPulse and our top story. Inclusive growth and radical economic transformation are the two main topics that dominated talks at the Black Management Annual Conference today. The two-day conference is currently underway at Gallagher Convention Center in Midrand.
So towards the engagement, we get more of that.
Issues of radical economic transformation and inclusive economic growth dominated the conversation on the day one of the conference.
Things are bad. If you analyze the past 10 years, there's been movement forward, and then in no time there's been movement backward. And that's just why I'm, as NUMSA, of the firm view that there's no deliberate attempt to ensure that there's transformation at the workplace.
The issue of gender parity in the workplace also topped the agenda.
In terms of women empowerment, I think we have made progress. We could do better, but we have made progress. And I think to a large extent the ruling party has been quite instrumental in that, in the fact that they themselves have set themselves targets of what needs to be achieved by them as a party. And therefore, you know, when leadership does things, somehow they trickle.
The Competition Commission emphasized that barriers to entry for smaller businesses need to be broken down for the economy to thrive.
If you have a lot of black people who have been excluded historically from the economy, how you regulate should ensure that there is massive opportunities for entry, which is the only way in which you can have black people entering.
0.4% in the past 7 years.
Themed South Africa We Deserve, the 2017 BMF conference has undoubtedly dissected how to achieve a total transformation in our society post-1994. Thank you, Mudong. ANN7, Johannesburg.
And joining us in studio, Professor Sipho Siebe, political analyst, Dr. Mazwe Majola, Umnoto Wamazwe Consulting CEO, and to our panelists, thanks so much for joining us. I know you also had an audience, or rather an opportunity to present. We spoke to the president of BMF and yesterday, talking about the room to maneuver in making material changes as policy stands, primarily in salary disparities. What else came out today, Professor Siebe?
Well, I'll just give you just a short briefing of 3 points that I sought to raise. And it's also important that we also reflect where we've come from. That when the BMF started, the whole idea was really around the broader struggles of transformation. Remember, the language that we're using by all political parties, especially liberation movements, was the liberation of black people in general and Africans in particular. And the BMF was formed at the time when people felt that we must also prepare ourselves to get into the economic space. So when the ANC later talks about the economic transformation, it was a part of the long struggle that had been started by the BMF. But the main task at that time was really because there was a loosening, especially by multinationals, to say for us to be able to get more black people and as clients, it's important that we start having a reflection of black people. You know, people talk about the civil code of the 80s. So the idea of black managers, because at that time, black people could not own unless if it was a sponsor shop or a tuck shop somewhere. But the idea of management was very important, and the BMF was formed to deal with addressing the challenges of black managers. But what also became very clear is that as we approached the struggle, it was more about black managers being made into junior partners as almost mimicking white people. So the affirmation was white people affirming black people. This is why sometimes when black people are appointed into the position, the majority of black people say, but he's worse than the white people because they tried very hard to be like white people. So right now we are in the new dispensation where challenges are different. And the way we entered this discussion in 1994 was to say there must be an ownership element. And hence we came up with the notion of giving people shares where they were serving on boards. But then we realized that that is not taking us anywhere. And the next thing was, oh, but from ownership, we must talk about management. From management, we must talk about skills. From skills, we must also talk about expansion where you have social responsibility. So you could see a degree of refinement of the same concept of saying, how do we make sure that black people also play a part in the economy? But as we speak today, and as we will point out later, black people still remain marginal in the economy of this country. And hence, this discussion about the South Africa we deserve must also address the fundamental issues beyond hugging ourselves in the sports field.
All right, I understand that it has to be a slow, painful, cumbersome process, considering the past we come from, and in the interest of harmony and keeping the peace. Things had to progress almost gradually. But we're now 23 years into democracy. We see the frustration from service delivery protests, fees must fall, and all other campaigns, that the regulation, it sounds now that radicalism is the only other level that we need to aspire towards. Dr. Majola, your view?
Of course, that is why now there is this narrative and this debate about radical economy transformation, because it cannot be a gradual economy. It has been gradually so long. This snail's pace has taken so long. To fix this thing now, you need very bold and courageous leaders who will introduce tough policies and then radicalize, radical in a sense that you need fast and bold and pushy and make things happen, because there is no growth that can take place automatically.
Yeah,
anything has to be pushed, and you've got to make sure that you put measures in place to say this thing must take place, and then you need people who will want to do that, who will have a will to do that.
All right, some of the challenges, of course, have been about evaluation, monitoring, etc., that the reforms of EE or employment equity, affirmative action, etc., were implemented. But we still sit with a situation where the Statistics SA Labour Department will release salary disparities between black and white in the same profession and the same skill set, still having a gap of about 7% or to 10% in the way salaries are paid. Why is that still the case if we're talking about, means and levers of using state mechanisms to deal with inequality?
Yeah, one of the interesting submissions that was made today was by Stephen Friedman. What he makes what he points out is our naivety in engaging at the level of the economy. First of all, we had the political settlement, and that was informed by the marginalization and the disenfranchisement of black people in terms of them being citizens. But what we did not do is to look at what were the consequences in other areas. In as much as we talk about the TRC in the political level, we did not talk about the TRC in business. We didn't talk about the TRC in the universities. We didn't talk about the TRC in other areas. But what we also did not factor are the issues of how the system works in terms of co-opting a few of us and using them to advance the very same interests. So what you are saying is that effectively the patterns of ownership have not changed. This is why when you go to the ANC's statement, in January statement, as well as the State of the Nation address of the President, it makes it very clear, even though some leaders of the ANC who are very senior seem to have forgotten that, but it says, if you look at that a fundamental change must occur in terms of the structures, the systems, the institutions, the processes, and to disrupt the patterns of ownership, management, and control of the economy. So it's a very clear position. But what the government has actually said is that in approaching that, we are going to use what they call strategic levers. And that was spelled out very clearly about what those strategic levers are. One will be legislation. The second one will be regulations. The third one will be procurement and the budget. And both the president and the former Minister of Finance made it very clear that today, any big project must actually benefit black people. And if we look at the expenditure on goods and services, you're talking about 500 billion, says at least 30% of that must go to black hands. So you see an attempt of fine-tuning the mechanism.
Yeah,
something
but
that
let's
they could
just
have
break
done
it down.
years.
Yes, sure. Let's break down the set-asides, preferential procurement systems, and the supply chain management that says at least you need to have a particular cohort or designated group of women and youth. You need to get a verification certificate that indeed will say you are black, as you claim you are. All of that compliance, you level 1 contributor, has still not generated the opportunities that black people ought to have had, because the gatekeepers in themselves would require certain prerequisites in terms of a contract that you simply don't have, i.e. the capital up front, the capacity to deliver. And you know, we're in a consumer-based economy where the monopoly is having a field day. You know, we depend in terms of what we eat, we wear, etc., on the monopoly, not creating our own industries. Isn't that also part of the problem?
It is, absolutely. If the environment is still not conducive, you can put all policies and regulations, but the important things is to put them into practice. If they are not in practice and the monitoring measures to be there, because anyone still doing whatever he wants to do. I mean, there's still not clear and close and strict monitoring measures that will catch those who are not, participating, or those who are not complying. So it's still difficult for black managers or for black business people, because there's still those who are still controlling the economy, they're still holding back. They don't want to release it. And then the policies are there, but the implementation is not enough.
All right.
And the monitoring system is not enough as well.
Yeah, but is there, I mean, do we have enough innovation? I mean, we will say that, you know, South African Chris Barnard, you know, performed the first heart transplant. There's all sorts of other technologies that were used globally in observing data around migration of people, statistics around, you know, technology, etc. Why are we not seeing as many entrepreneurs generating or collaborating even to create new industries?
Yeah, I think what we lack is a system of support, but also the issue of political will. Like I said, one of the things about that black people were naive about, they felt that given what they had actually gone through, and given the fact that they're willing to forgive so much, the other side will play its role. And that was a political naivety. The reality is that even when black people, even when they're highly qualified with their PhDs, once they go into that environment, they are forced to change to become little white people, and they are not able to effect change. So right now we are now sober. This is why the whole notion of radicalism and militancy. And remember, during our time when we started, the people like Mandela would say, but you must understand it takes time. Now 22 years later, 23 years later, young people are saying, look, you've got the time, it has not worked. So we're no longer going to use the language of it takes time. We're going to say we want it now. And what we've seen works. I mean, like the young students have shown at universities, is that we would be debating about whether we should remove the statue or not, and where we're going to place it. They said we're going to remove it tomorrow. And that radicalism made changes. This is why today nobody wants to defend those statues, but our generation will be the one that will be engaging these people with the understanding. So at least we've packed the notion of gradualism. We're simply saying if change must happen, it must happen in our lifetime.
Yeah, but again, policies have been in place, as we mentioned. But if again there is the skewed economy where you are saying based on the kindness or benevolence of the white monopoly capital, if you want to call it that, and their reluctance to want to share and include black people, it's not going to happen, even if a policy is there, because you still have the Constitution. There's all forms of other barriers that you have to consider before we see radicalism take shape. Notwithstanding that it's already been clouded as another code name for theft. It's been clouded around conspiracy and controversy. So how do we work around that to ensure that indeed what we're talking about is not reverse racism, number one, but deals effectively with the issues of redress economically?
I think with the whole notion of policy, in our country we've always been having very good policies. But what I think we still lack is the continuation of policy. Let me give you an example. 1994, we get RDP. RDP comes as a very good policy and then speaks about redistribute, develop, and is influenced more by the unions, and ANC accepts it. 1996, and then the government or the president brings what we call the gear. Yes. So now it's no more about redistribution, develop, but now it's more about growth first before redistribution. So there is this pattern that whenever a new administration or a president or a leader takes over, he wants to start his own thing. And then after gear, and then comes the new the administration of President Zuma, and then introduce the NDP or NGP, and then 3 years to come, we don't know. So there is in that continuation that when a new administration takes over and say, more especially, ANC is about, it's not about individualism. Even ANC will always tell yourself that whenever they talk about policy, they will say that it's not my policy as the president, but it's an organization. But I fail to understand why, when someone takes over, we'll always want to then discard the previous, what to call policy, and wants to introduce his, and then that 5 years in office, you are still grappling with the whole putting together the policy. The implementation is not there. Another one comes back. So that's, I think, what to call the lack, that continuation.
Yeah, but in our own private spaces, areas of influence for those that are in the echelons of power or even managerial positions, if they themselves are being stifled because they happen to be the only darkie in the boardroom, or they happen to be a replica of their senior white executive, how then do we implement the gender parity to make sure that people are paid a decent living wage, that the conditions are equal?
Well, first of all, let me just respond to this notion of a policy that changes. The reason why we have the NDP is precisely to a response to this many shiftings. Now we have a program, or what you call a socio-economic blueprint that is long-term. And what we are now talking about is until 2030, then you take it in terms of chunks, the MTSF, and the MTSF must be informed by NDP, and the annual plans must be informed by the MTSF. That is, you're talking about 15 years, 5 years, and 1 year. But there must be a continuity, because we learn sometimes by mistake, but than by not making them. Then the second issue is pressure will also come from below. What has happened with our people, they have exercised patience. And what we see now is that they are being impatient. Yeah. And effectively, for as long as the people are not putting pressure on the governors, we're going to go on a snail's pace. But we also have sophisticated young people. Remember, one of the challenges that we have, which Mujanku was also able to raise, is that the leadership that took over had never run anything. These are people who were in prison, some of them were languishing in exile, so they had no clue about what governance is. So mistakes were made, but now we become much more sophisticated. But also, this is also like assuming the center stage. Remember, the biggest problem and advantage of Black consciousness movement, which was jettisoned, is that we located the possibility of change within Black people. But the new strategy was to say, white people will help us to move forward, and they never did that. Yeah,
very briefly, Mr. Majola, again, we saw that with the FNB4, we're having a private conversation reflecting on the issues and the dynamics of South Africa ended up losing their jobs, on raising issues of transformation and inequality. So how then are we able in our spaces to at least effect some form of influence?
We need strong cadres, we need strong, particularly black executives, people who will really drive transformation in companies or in business. Not people who will just be put there and they are not driving and they don't have any will. So we need bold, we need courageous leaders when they're given jobs, and then they will take that seriously, and then they drive, transform. Transformation is painful. Transformation is not easy, it's not by nature, so you need people who will be very, very courageous to drive it.
All right, sizodla umnotho sonke.
Sizodla umnotho sonke. Awudli umnotho.
Thank you so much. That's Professor Sipho Siepe, political analyst, and we have Dr. Mazwe Majola, umnotho wamazwe consulting CEO. Thanks indeed for joining us, and we'll take a look at other stories we're following up for you.